6. Elvis's senior year at Humes High School was not much different from his other school years. Very little about him was particularly noticeable, apart, of course, from his appearance. His teachers remember him as a very average student who, with a little less concentration, might not have graduated. His life in Memphis had been only marginally better than life in Tupelo, Mississippi, where he was born, the surviving twin in a birth that almost killed his mother, the former Gladys Smith. His earlier life was lived in much the same squalor and poverty experienced by the many destitute blacks in the rigidly segregated South of those days. In 1948, when Elvis was 13, his father, Vernon Presley, decided it was time to leave the tiny shotgun home in Tupelo. The big city across the border might afford a chance for higher pay and a shot at the good life. He packed all the household goods into a green Plymouth one night and the family headed for Memphis. Vernon Presley didn't find the big time in Memphis. He did find a job at the United Paint Company, packing cans for less than $50 a week. Gladys helped out with part-time work, first in the sewing mills, then in coffee shops and restaurants and as a nurse's aide at St. Joseph's Hospital. If living conditions in the tiny white frame in Tupelo were bad, life didn't improve in their next home, a 3-room structure in a dull concrete complex where water and electricity alternated in not working. It was part of a dingy, federally funded housing project called Lauderdale Courts, especially designed for poor Southerners. It was eventually discovered that Gladys and Vernon's combined income exceeded the $200 a month maximum allowed for tenants in the project, but somehow they escaped eviction. Red and Sonny West grew up in similar housing projects a mile away, Hurt Village and Lamar Terrace Race. It sure had the right name, Red recalls, because the people living there sure did hurt. If you made more than $200 a month in any of those projects, you had to move out. It was as if it was considered that $200 a month was too much money for you to live in a federal housing project. Well, I guess we didn't miss many meals, but we sure postponed a darn lot. We were poor and so was Elvis. Like most transplanted kids in a new town, Elvis withdrew into a shell of timidity and shyness. Whatever he lacked in friends on the street, Gladys Presley more than made up for with her attention and affection. Presley has said that he often wanted to go down to the local creek with the other little boys from the project, but Mama wouldn't let me. She just never let me out of her sight. I used to get annoyed when I was little, but I later realized it was all because she loved me so much. It was as if God had told the deeply religious Gladys Presley that the death of Elvis's twin, Jesse Garin, was a sign from heaven to double her love and vigil over Elvis. Mrs. Fay Harris was a friend of the Presleys when they lived in Tupelo. Gladys thought Elvis was the greatest thing that ever happened, Mrs. Harris recalls, and she treated him that way. She worshipped that child from the day he was born until the day she died. She'd always keep him at home, or, when she let him go out to play, she was always out looking to see that he was all right. And wherever she went, whether it was out visiting or even down to the grocery store, she always had her little boy along. Despite the tight dollars, Elvis's parents did everything they could to make Elvis feel he was better off than a lot of the kids he rubbed shoulders with at school. His Christmas and birthday presents were always a shade better or more expensive than his friends' dot. As a result, Elvis could be considered a spoiled child, certainly by comparison with the kids he grew up with. When Elvis was 14, he wanted a bike for Christmas. The Presleys couldn't afford it, but they did manage to scrape up $12 for a guitar. With a few lessons from his uncle, Vester Presley, Elvis was soon able to pluck away at the main chords. Elvis doesn't play the guitar, apart from the rhythm chords, says Red West. Most people think he is an expert guitarist, which he is not. He doesn't read a lick of music, either. Although when he is singing, he knows what he is doing. He has natural music in him. He has never had a lesson on the piano, either, but he can pick up a number with surprising skill. But there are a lot better guitarists than him around, which is kind of funny because the guitar was his trademark, and most people think he is fantastic on it. While Red West as a young teenager was practicing to become a bone crusher on the football field, Elvis stayed at home, practiced his guitar and began developing a singing voice at the First Assembly Church of God, a tiny, rickety structure on Adams Street in Tupelo. Red recalls Presley's telling him on a dozen occasions that his mother remembered 3-year-old Elvis slipping off her lap at a church service and running down to the choir. There his little voice would try to follow the singing. It gave him his first contact with music and that stayed with him. People are always talking about where he got his natural ability from, says Red. That little son of a bitch was singing his ass off back in that church in Tupelo. And when he was about 9 he would sing trios with his mother and father. To this day, old Vernon can throw his head back and sing one hell of a song. He's a great singer. Vernon can be walking around a suite singing his ass off, particularly a gospel song like Where No One Stands Alone. Now his voice is so good, sometimes you will stop what you are doing and start listening to him. Then he will get kind of embarrassed and knock it off. But Elvis gets a lot of his ability from the old man. And, incidentally, he gets a lot of his good looks from the old boy, too. Later, in Memphis, he would wander through the black section of town, the famous Beale Street, and listen to the blacks wail their blues. The influence was so strong that people said Presley's first record sounded like a black voice inside a white body, a reference that never pleased Presley. He had definite ideas about blacks, as he did about Catholics and Jews. If Elvis was sheltered, Red West recalls that Gladys once threw groceries at a child who was threatening to beat up her son. He was, in the broadest sense, a good boy. Red puts it this way: he simply worshipped the ground his mother walked on. To him she was a mother, a friend, a big sister all rolled into one. I mean, she was his whole life. If ever he talked about his family going anywhere, he would never talk about the family as a whole. It would always be mom and them went to church, or mom and them went to the movies. It was like she was the only one in the whole family, and the rest just were along for the ride. It was like that even after she died. He still talked about her like she was living. In Elvis's senior year, Red didn't see much of him. Singing down to the choir, there his little voice would try to follow the singing. It gave him his first contact with music, and that stayed with him. People are always talking about where he got his natural ability from, says Red. That little son of a bitch was singing his ass off back in that church in Tupelo. And when he was about 9, he would sing trios with his mother and father. To this day, old Vernon can throw his head back and sing one hell of a song. He's a great singer. Vernon can be walking around a suite singing his ass off, particularly a gospel song like Where No One Stands Alone. Now his voice is so good, sometimes you will stop what you are doing and start listening to him. Then he will get kind of embarrassed and knock it off. But Elvis gets a lot of his ability from the old man. And, incidentally, he gets a lot of his good looks from the old boy, too. Later, in Memphis, he would wander through the black section of town, the famous Beale Street, and listen to the blacks wail their blues. The influence was so strong that people said Presley's first record sounded like a black voice inside a white body, a reference that never pleased Presley. He had definite ideas about blacks, as he did about Catholics and Jews. If Elvis was sheltered, Red West recalls that Gladys once threw groceries at a child who was threatening to beat up her son. He was, in the broadest sense, a good boy. Red puts it this way: he simply worshipped the ground his mother walked on. To him she was a mother, a friend, a big sister all rolled into one. I mean, she was his whole life. If ever he talked about his family going anywhere, he would never talk about the family as a whole. It would always be mom and them went to church, or mom and them went to the movies. It was like she was the only one in the whole family, and the rest just were along for the ride. It was like that even after she died. He still talked about her like she was living. In Elvis's senior year, Red didn't see much of him. Apart from pulling him out of jams or an occasional holo in the hallways, except for woodshop class, run by a teacher named Mr. Hiltpole. It was there that Red saw Elvis at his wildest. And that meant, says Red, he would occasionally get in woodchip throwing fights with the other kids when Mr. Hiltpole was out of the room. And that was about as wild as he got. He was a pretty quiet kid. Being Elvis Presley, save for the long hair, rated as highly forgettable in a school that measured its respect quotient on whether you were at the top of your class or whether you could pound through a defensive line or whether you could knock a guy on his butt. Elvis really couldn't handle any of that, so there was no place for him to go down in Hume's high school history until midway through his final year. One of the big events of the year was the school variety concert. Red recalls, it consisted of about 30 acts. The principal, old T.C. Brindley, was a tough old son of a gun on the outside, but inside he was a good old boy with a soft heart. The idea behind the variety concert was to be able to set up a school fund to raise money. Now, during the year, if some kid didn't have the money to go to a school dance or buy some football gear, you could go to old Brindley, and if your hardship was legitimate, he would see that the variety concert fund would look after it all for you. The person who ran the show was a history teacher who taught Elvis. I think she always had a soft spot for Elvis because he was so polite toward her. I put an act in the show. I played the trumpet and I got together a guitar and a bass. It was a heck of a big day and we were all very nervous. I didn't take much notice of all the others because I was so intent on my own. The rules of the concert were that whoever got the biggest applause would be given the honor of having an encore and would be declared the winner. Red recalls he had finished his act when he got the shock of his life, seeing Elvis come out on the stage with his guitar. To be honest, I never thought he would have the guts to get out there in front of those people. He just never impressed me as being that brave. I never even knew he sang, but I was to get a surprise. Elvis shuffled timidly onto the stage. His shyness, however, was offset by his elaborately combed crowning glory, his Vaseline, walled hair, and a bright red shirt. Then it happened. Elvis put one foot up on a chair to act as a prop, and he started to plunk away at the tune Old Shep. Then he whipped into a fast song, then a ballad, Red West Smiles. Hell, do you know while Elvis was singing the love songs, there was one lady teacher crying, and there were other teachers who had tears in their eyes. When he finished his show, the kids went crazy. They applauded and applauded. They just went mad. He was an easy winner. At first Elvis just stood there, surprised as hell. He seemed to be amazed that for the first time in his life someone, other than his family, really liked him. I'll never really know when Elvis got bitten by the bug of loving the applause of the audience, but my guess is that it happened right then in Hume's high school. At last, it seemed, he had found a way to make outsiders love him. He still to this day craves that live audience yelling and screaming for him. Of course, it's the same with most performers. But with Elvis I think it goes all the way back to the time at school where the only time he made a mark was on stage. I saw it that day. As shy as he was, he had a definite magic on stage. After the show, he just seemed to go back to being ordinary old Elvis. But on stage he had control. Red continues. Later on, when he got a little more confidence and he started to feel himself, he really knew how to manipulate an audience. He knew exactly when to hit them with fast tunes that whipped them up, and he knew exactly when to hit them with ballads and love songs. If any audience doesn't warm to him immediately, he uses every trick in the business. I'll even tell you of a time later on when he actually bought an audience that was being too quiet. He bought them, then he whipped them up until they went berserk. In the final 6 months of school, Elvis became an instant favorite at school parties. Despite his shyness, he would often arrive with his beaten up old guitar slung over his shoulder. He would go to a corner of the room, but as soon as the kids pushed him hard enough, he would oblige with a song. After Elvis graduated, however, his ambitions extended only as far as what his appearance suggested, being a truck driver. He got a job at the Crown Electric Company driving a truck for $1.25 an hour. He turned over most of the money to his mother for household bills, with Elvis making almost $50 a week. The Presley family could afford to move out of Lauderdale Courts to a slightly cleaner and bigger apartment on Lamar Avenue. New. What little money he didn't give to his mother, he would occasionally use on buying sprees at Lansky Brothers, a clothing store on Beale Street. Lansky Brothers specialized in shocking, pink peg trousers and lemon yellow suits with shoulders so wide that the wearer would have to slide through doors sideways if he wanted to avoid contact with the door frame. In later years, Presley was to go to such celebrity tailors as Sydivore and Nudies, where he would often pay $4,000 for one gold lame suit, and right up until 1974, he would occasionally go to Lansky Brothers and pick out something he liked. I remember when he was about 17 or 18, one of the owners, Bernard Lansky, recalls, he would come over and press his nose against the window, like it was a candy store. He didn't have any money then. Now he comes in and buys the place out. He has never forgotten us, no airs about that. Man. You meet some people and watch them go up the ladder and never come down to say hello. Not Elvis. He has always got a word for you. In his final year at school, Red kept on playing football, and Elvis kept on driving a truck. Occasionally they would see each other, wave hello, and that was about the size of it. Elvis was happy as a truck driver, extremely well liked, and he had the prospect of a steady job for life before him. But the ambition to perform was never far from his mind. On Elvis's truck route was the Sun Recording Company, a small outfit run by a genial man named Sam Phillips. Phillips's dream was one day to put his name on the map by getting something new in a sound. Among other studio services performed by Sun Recording was a gimmick that offered the public a chance to cut your own disc. For $4 anyone could come in and record a birthday message, an anniversary song or anything he or she wanted. One Saturday afternoon, Elvis wandered into Sun Recording carrying his guitar over his shoulder. On that particular afternoon, the office manager, Marion Kisker, was running the office. Miss Kisker, an enthusiastic woman who was always on the lookout to give new talent a helping hand, was a former Miss Radio Memphis. If Marion Kisker had not been on duty that Saturday afternoon in 1954, Elvis Presley might still be a truck driver today. Perhaps as much as the choir at the First Assembly of God Church in Tupelo and as much as Gladys and Vernon Presley for buying him a $12 guitar. Marion Kisker must be credited with helping spawn the phenomenon known as Elvis Presley. Presley himself certainly thought so, says Red West. One thing I got to say about Elvis, he never forgot that lady. He would pick up magazines and newspapers all saying about how he got started, and all the stories had Sam Phillips as being the man who discovered Elvis. Well, Elvis told me I don't know how many times. Man. You meet some people and watch them go up the ladder and never come down to say hello. Not Elvis. He has always got a word for you. In his final year at school, Red kept on playing football, and Elvis kept on driving a truck. Occasionally they would see each other, wave hello, and that was about the size of it. Elvis was happy as a truck driver, extremely well liked, and he had the prospect of a steady job for life before him. But the ambition to perform was never far from his mind. On Elvis's truck route was the Sun Recording Company, a small outfit run by a genial man named Sam Phillips. Phillips's dream was one day to put his name on the map by getting something new in a sound. Among other studio services performed by Sun Recording was a gimmick that offered the public a chance to cut your own disc. For $4, anyone could come in and record a birthday message, an anniversary song, or anything he or she wanted. One Saturday afternoon, Elvis wandered into Sun Recording carrying his guitar over his shoulder. On that particular afternoon, the office manager, Marion Kisker, was running the office. Miss Kisker, an enthusiastic woman who was always on the lookout to give new talent a helping hand, was a former Miss Radio Memphis. If Marion Kisker had not been on duty that Saturday afternoon in 1954, Elvis Presley might still be a truck driver today, perhaps as much as the choir at the First Assembly of God Church in Tupelo, and as much as Gladys and Vernon Presley for buying him a $12 guitar. Marion Kisker must be credited with helping spawn the phenomenon known as Elvis Presley. Presley himself certainly thought so, says Red West. One thing I got to say about Elvis, he never forgot that lady. He would pick up magazines and newspapers all saying about how he got started, and all the stories had Sam Phillips as being the man who discovered Elvis. Well, Elvis told me I don't know how many times that Marion Kisker was the one who really did the job. She was the one who kept his telephone number, and she was the one who knew what Sam was looking for, a black sound inside a white body. Now, Elvis had respect for Sam, but he would say to me, if it wasn't for that lady, I would never have got a start. That woman, she was the one who had faith. She was the one who pushed me. Sure, Sam had the studio, but it was that Marion who did it for me. 99. Elvis Presley swaggered in, a broodingly handsome boy of 18. Not realizing that he was about to step on the first rung of a ladder that would take him to breathless heights where he would be as Tory's highest paid performer. He plunked down his $4 in front of Marion Kisker and said he wanted to cut a disc for a present. Not surprisingly, the present was for his mother. The first song he recorded was My Happiness, a number made famous by the Ink Spots. The flip side was a number called That's When Your Heartaches Begin. For some reason that Miss Kisker can't really put her finger on, she decided to tape part of the first side and all of the flip side. There was something vaguely interesting in young Presley's voice. She wanted her boss to hear it. Sam Phillips listened to the record with mild interest. It could, he reasoned, be something like what he was looking for, a white who could sing something like a Negro. Phillips brought the boy into the studio for a few sessions but really couldn't make up his mind. The voice had a lot wrong with it. There was a lot missing. After several false starts, Sam Phillips had his doubts whether Elvis Presley would after all be the great white hope. But Phillips was a kind-hearted man. He decided to give Elvis a chance to wing it with two local boys who were making a name for themselves, pianist-guitarist Scotty Moore and his neighbor Bill Black, a bass player. They helped make up a local group called the Starlight Wranglers. After doing a few pick-up songs, both Scotty and Bill were only marginally impressed with the new boys' talent. Perhaps the problem at that time was that Elvis Presley was not singing in the way he wanted to sing. He was singing in the way he thought they wanted him to sing. One afternoon, when Presley, Scotty and Bill were together at the studio just drinking cokes and making no particular headway, Elvis picked up his guitar and started to freestyle, wailing That's All Right, Mama, by Black songwriter Arthur Crudup. Scotty and Bill started picking up the beat, jam session style. Suddenly Sam Phillips rushed out of the recording booth as if he were being chased by an enraged bull. Presley recalls that those early numbers sounded like he was beating an empty bucket, but Sam Phillips screamed at them, whatever they were doing, do more of it. He had found the lost chord. This was the sound he was looking for. Sam Phillips pressed the record of That's All Right, Mama, and started to hustle it on the local disc jockey shows. Many of the local experts had their doubts about the record. It was 1954, and the South was a long way from being integrated. Elvis sounded dangerously black. Despite the misgivings, the record went on to sell 7,000 copies, a very respectable figure for Memphis in those days. It did so with the help of a popular disc jockey named Dewey Phillips, no relation to Sam, who had a program called Red Hot and Blue on station WHBQ. Sam Phillips pressured Dewey to play That's All Right, Mama, and Dewey obliged. Dewey Phillips, now dead, remembered one night when I played the record 15 times. Suddenly telephone calls and telegrams started to pour into the station. Everybody wanted to know who the new boy was. I wanted to get hold of Elvis for an interview. Now, at that time a lot of folks thought Elvis was a colored boy. I got hold of Vernon, Elvis's daddy, who said he was at a movie, down at Suzor's No. 2 theater. I told Vernon to get his boy to the station. Before long, Elvis came running in. Dewey told Elvis that he was going to interview him. Elvis replied that he didn't know anything about being interviewed. Among the questions that Dewey tried to emphasize was where Elvis had gone to school. I wanted to get that out because a lot of people had thought he was colored, Dewey said. Humes was lily white. Finally, Dewey thanked him and said goodbye. Disappointed, Elvis asked whether or not he was going to be interviewed. Dewey replied that the mic had been open all the time. He had been interviewed, Dewey recalled. He broke out in a cold sweat. Red West remembers the tune in the interview well. I just sort of said to myself, that Elvis Presley has really made it. Fancy. A guy I went to school with singing on the radio. Red, of course, was in his final year at school. It was the beginning of fall, 1954, and he and his Warriors were deep into serious football. The team was all set to play their arch rivals, Bartlett, across town. Red was boarding the school bus with his team, led by Coach Boyce, the man who had so strenuously objected to the length of Elvis's hair. I was just about to get into the bus, and I noticed Elvis walking the opposite way. He was about to get into a battered old Lincoln coupe. It was green and about 10 years old. His mommy and daddy had bought it for him. It was hard for them to pay for it, but it gives you some idea how much they loved him to scrape together that kind of money. Not many boys his age, 19 I think he was, had a car of their own. No sir. Protocol for football hero Red was reversed this time. Once it was the shy Elvis who would address Red first. Now it was Red who waved and shouted a greeting. Hi, Elvis. Red remembers he was decked out in a black and white draped cowboy jacket with black pants. They were real sharp threads. Anyway, he waved back to me. I was impressed. Like in Memphis in those days, if you were on the radio, it was like being a movie star. Elvis was a celebrity. He was a pretty big deal. As the bus pulled out, Elvis fell in behind and followed the team over to Bartlett. Red didn't have time to shoot the breeze with him. He was hustled into a dressing room and then to the field, where he played center. Red reports with no small measure of pride that Humes battered Bartlett. I noticed that Elvis was sort of hanging around quietly on the sidelines, just watching from under a tree, really quiet like. I was taking a shower, and one of the guys told me that Elvis was hanging around outside. I dried off and I went out to say hello. Red remembers that Elvis's appearance had improved dramatically. He had filled out, and his face was no longer assaulted with acne. His hair was properly styled, although it still looked pretty outrageous. He seemed to have lost the greasy delinquent look, and there were real indications that he had the makings of genuine good looks. Elvis seemed really pleased to see Red. Hi, Red, how goes it? Nice game, man. Red was pleased with himself and pleased that Elvis was warm and friendly. Hey, thanks man. Hey, you're pretty big time. I hear you're recording all over the place. It's pretty good. You're a star. Despite his minor celebrity, Elvis smiled shyly. He was still a little in awe of Red West. It was almost as if Red was the guy that Elvis wanted to be. Right then, says Red, Elvis was the guy I wanted to be. They walked across the field toward the car. When they reached the battered green Lincoln, Presley said, Hey, hop in, man. Let's ride around a little. Sure thing. Appreciate it, Red answered. Well, what have you been doing with yourself? Presley still seemed a little unsure of himself. There was no mention of the hassles that Red had pulled him out of. Then suddenly Presley said, Hey, why don't you come along one night, maybe at the weekends? If you ain't doing anything, come along anytime you like. Red West's social calendar wasn't exactly bulging. Hell, yes, man, I'd sure like that. Sounds like a whole lot of fun. Right then, maybe Elvis didn't know it and maybe Red didn't know it, but from that moment until July 1976, when a lifelong friendship started to fall apart, Red was Elvis's companion, friend, protector, the man who watched over him in the same way his twin brother might have, had he lived. I had a lot of laughs, a lot of good times with Elvis, says Red. I also had a lot of rough times with him. Elvis over the years has changed since those days, unfortunately, but I grew to love the son of a bitch, and despite everything, maybe I still do.